Alright, so here we have we've discussed connection string settings in our web.config file, and now want to look at impersonation. Before we discuss impersonation, or before we go into the web.config file, because that's where we set the impersonation credentials, we want to understand why impersonation is necessary. At what time would you like to use impersonation? There might be a scenario you may need impersonation sometime. Okay, now let's assume you have a particular credential that you want to use to run your application, and this application, you don't want that credential to have access to the database. What I mean is that you have these users here, users in your database, and now you want to have your application running with a particular user account that have certain privileges or not. That is, this user account you want to use to run your application may or may not have certain particular privileges on the database. Let's take a scenario where this user account you want to use does not have access to the database, but it has the credentials you use for your application. In that way, impersonation might be a good option. And then access to the database might now be on the basis of logged on user credentials that are also having access and permissions to access various database tables. Another scenario might be you have a user credential that have access to very much higher access to the database, maybe to all the tables, to access all the stored procedures, to execute all the stored procedures, to able to read, write all the tables. But these access, the users does not have all these access, and you want your application, certain pages of your application, to be able to access unrestricted, having unrestricted access to the database. In that way, you might be able to use impersonation to run your application. And that brings us to the concept of anonymous users. You might also want a situation whereby users who are not logged on to the domain, who does not have credentials to log on to Windows, you want them to use a particular account. In that way, you can also put that account in web.config file and set the impersonation to true. So here, normally impersonation is set in the web.config file, this time in the system.web section. Anywhere in the system.web section, you can put your impersonation code. So you have the IntelliSense there. Sorry, I'm getting it wrong. Okay, so it's not just, it's identity impersonates. Identity impersonates equals true. Username and passwords you set here, but right in this demo we are doing here, we will not use impersonation. We are not going to use impersonation. I would like to clarify later on, but for now we will not use impersonation here. And also look at this place, you have authentication mode Windows. So now for the next consideration, we've discussed this and we've considered impersonation, and we say sometimes there may be need to use impersonation, but for me, I realize that most times you might not actually need to use impersonation for anything. So we want to move to the next step, and that is our IIS setting. What do you consider when you want to configure IIS for the particular website or for the particular visual directory where your pages or your site is hosted? And that we'll look at in the next demonstration.